If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What is the scariest thing that has ever happened to you? I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up chopping/gathering firewood for my grandmother because it was getting dark. Driving back on a dirt road at about 30 miles per hour, give or take 5 miles per hour, I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, passenger side, my uncle quickly shouted, "Don't." I completely froze. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest, then completely stopped when I heard a tap tap on my window. My uncle sped up and was loudly praying in my native language. I didn't know what was going on and thought it was over till our truck suddenly dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me and don't turn away," over and over. Then I heard it again, tap tap, but from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed and the truck dipped again. My uncle looked around and sighed. It was quiet besides the truck and the road. He looked at me and said, "We will ask your father to do a prayer in the morning, so the evil will forget our faces." Navajo to English equivalent. I remember curling up on the seat and just staring at the radio, watching the time, listening to my uncle sing an old prayer till we got to my grandmother's house. The scariest thing to ever happen to me happened not even a month ago. It was a terrible prank by my friends consisting of a creepy doll, 30 minutes, 3 good friends, and some behind my back trickery. To make this easier to comprehend, this is the godforsaken doll. I have never been so scared of a doll in my entire life. Just its presence makes me extremely uncomfortable. Late one night after a successful band practice, me and my band mates got onto the topic of things that scared us, which is funny because I'm the one who brought it all up. Anyhow, one of my friends, we'll call him C, decided to bring out this doll and display to the other 2 friends, K and M, just how terrified of the doll I was. After 15 minutes of torture, C took it away, and when he returned, M claimed he had to use the restroom. This is where the trickery begins. C claimed to have returned it to his father's bedroom, and when M returned, he told me and K that he tampered with it to scare C and that it was by the couch in the living room. Shit. So C and M argue about its whereabouts, and when they check, it isn't at either of the locations. Shit. So after we all freak out, mine being the only genuine reaction, and I decide it's time to GTFO ASAP. So I walk outside. And I'm greeted by a lovely sight. Needless to say, I shat bricks and beelined back inside, where I'm greeted by laughter-filled apologies. I felt pure relief, and honestly it was an amazing prank. I don't feel wronged at all. Sorry if that was hard to understand. It's a rather long story. My friend's grandfather told us this story. Grandpa owned a large herd of sheep, which during the summer grazed in the mountains in central Utah. In the 1960s, his sheep herder was a small Mexican man, we'll call Juan. Juan stayed in a very small trailer in a meadow, while tending the sheep. One evening, Grandpa drives his truck up the mountain to deliver some food and supplies to Juan. As he nears Juan's camp, he starts seeing dead sheep all over the ground. Many of the sheep were thrashed into pieces. As he arrives at Juan's trailer, he finds the door shut. He has to kick open the door to get inside, as Juan has locked it. Inside, Juan is curled up into a ball, mumbling incoherently and likely in shock. Grandpa picks up Juan, throws him into the truck, and takes off down the mountain to get Juan to a doctor. As he's flying down the twisty dirt road, Grandpa gets this terrible feeling like he's being watched and sees something out of the corner of his eye. By this time the sun is setting and the light isn't very good. He turns to look out the passenger side window and sees a creature he describes as looking like an inside-out deer, running alongside the truck. The creature dropped back out of sight, only to come bounding back even faster, running on his hind legs only. The creature then ran across the road right in front of the truck. Grandpa swerves to miss it and ends up rolling the truck down the mountainside. Juan is killed in the accident, and Grandpa spends more than a month in the hospital. It's possible that Grandpa was just playing with us, but that really wasn't his style. He was an old cowboy and swore that it was the truth. He brought it up when we were making fun of chupacabras. He believed that it was some sort chupacabra-like animal he saw. My wife and I had lived together for a few years and moved into a 2-level apartment. Occasionally, I started to hear a child scream. Just one scream, and definitely from inside the apartment. It would happen once every few days, and it was clearly an anguished, painful scream. Sometimes it would happen in the middle of the night, sometimes in broad daylight. I was starting to have some issues with my nerves after several weeks of this. I would always jump up and run through our apartment trying to figure out where the scream had come from. But, as it was a short scream and only once, I could never tell where the hell it was coming from. I started telling friends and family about it, because I was pretty wigged out. The screams that would happen around 4 a.m. were the worst. I was so keyed to that scream that I would jump up and run around in a desperate attempt to find the source of this pain scream. It would take me forever to get back to sleep after that. I'd just lay there with my heart pounding, waiting for another scream. I was cleaning my office one day when the scream happened in the same room with me. Scared the shit out of me. I don't frighten easily, but I'll admit I jumped like I was going to die. I look over to see that my computer screensaver was a 3D South Park Kenny floating around and getting stabbed by a spear. The sound was turned to off, but still once every few days, Kenny would scream in pain as the spear thing stabbed him. I felt like a fucking idiot, but also extremely relieved no child had been murdered in my apartment and was now haunting me. Okay, so this isn't supernatural at all, but it was the scariest and most disturbing thing that ever happened to me. When I was 20, I was visiting my friend's cabin in West Virginia. This thing was in the middle of nowhere. To get there you had to go on a lightless paved road, then a dirt road, then a not even a road. It was remote is what I'm saying. So anyways, everyone's hanging out and having a good time. I didn't drink at the time but was still playing drinking games with water. So at around 2 a.m. I get the sudden urge to leave and drive back to my home in New Jersey. I don't know why. It's about a 6-hour drive, and it's 2 a.m., and I'm having a good time. I do it anyways. As I'm saying my goodbyes, everyone is commenting on how weird it is, and dangerous since I'll probably get tired. I just can't stay though. So I get in my car and start driving. Windows down, music loud, enjoying the empty roads on a warm summer night. I get to the lightless, lane-less paved road and drive for about 2 miles going about 45 miles per hour. Suddenly I see something in the woods. I start to slow down, deciding what to do, my mind racing. It was a light, maybe a flashlight. At this hour? What the fuck? Okay, you're in a car, just see what it is. I stop the car. It's so late, just go. I turn the car around. Slowly I make my way back to where I saw the light, foot after foot creeps underneath my tires. I start thinking I imagined it, or it was a reflection, or it's gone now. And then, there it is. A faint little light about 30 feet in the woods. I stop, focus, squint, and can't figure out what it is. Like the worst character in the opening scene of any horror movie, I get out of the car. I don't even bring a flashlight. I go to the edge of the road and look as hard as I can. That's when I notice, it's a car's dome light. I call out asking if anyone is there, silence except for, and I kid you not, the faintest sound of a radio playing. So I make my way down the embankment and get to the back of the car. I call out again, nothing. I'm sure there is nothing there, but the light is on and the windows are fogged. I am terrified. I want to just go back to my car, but I also want to be a hero. I open the car door. I have to hop a little since the car is arched on its side. I look in, sure enough there is a girl slammed against the passenger side. There is blood everywhere. I climb into the car to see if she is alright. The radio is booming some happy summer song. She is breathing but not moving. I touch her neck, a faint pulse. Her breathing sounds like a wheezing dog. Like there's a chicken bone stuck in her throat. I reach for my cell phone, rural WV no signal. I sit there for just a second, not wanting to leave her alone here. I then notice the smell. I never knew blood had a smell, but it does. When there is that much, when you are surrounded by it. It smells. It smells like death, like you just can smell that this is wrong. Sweet metallic smelling death. I go to my car and hop in, still no signal. I look back at the dome light and back at my phone and peel out. I'm driving probably 65 now, checking my phone for bars. I realize this is stupid and that I don't want to crash too, so I slow down. I finally get a bar about 3 miles away and call 911. I talk to the dispatcher and give the best directions I can. She tells me to light a flare at the scene, and check the girl's breathing, apply pressure to any visibly bleeding wounds, and not move her. I get back to the car, and light the flare and place it behind my car. I'll light another one because I'm not sure which way the ambulance will be coming from. I rush back to the car, and pause outside the door. I'm almost in tears from adrenaline, but I want to help. This is my hero moment. I swing open the door, hop up and there she is. Her head cocked towards me. She looked like Sissy Spacek in Carrie, just covered in blood. Her hair was matted down with it, her face streaked with thick drying red droplets. She looks at me, and still with that bone in the throat wheeze, says, "What?" This might be a bad reference, but do you remember the voice the alien had in Independence Day when it's talking through the doctor? That's what it sounded like. I fell back out of the car. I looked back in and just said hello. She was looking right through me. She didn't move again. Just stared. I sat there in what was forever, This dying girl, blood everywhere, on me, on her, pooled in the bottom of the car, her just staring at me and through me. Chest heaving, little wheezes, shoulder torn open, blood, mouth closing and opening. Why didn't you wear a seatbelt? A pop song on the radio, more blood. We sat there forever. I feel like every moment in my life has taken a second since then, because that night, I locked eyes with a dead girl for an eternity. When I was about 10, me and my family were staying in this nice hotel. So we go down to breakfast one morning, and then when I get down there I'm like, shit, forgot my bag, better go back to the room and get it. So I get in the lift alone, and then about halfway up there's suddenly a beeping noise. Then the whole lift starts shuddering and then full on stops. The lights start dimming and then completely go out. I press the emergency button, nothing happens. And all the while, this beeping is still going on. Beeping, beeping, beeping. I stand there in the dark, I yell and scream and bang on the doors. And the beeping just goes on and on and on. While I'm just standing there, convinced that I'm gonna starve to death and no one's ever gonna find me. Eventually, after about an hour, the lift suddenly starts up again. I was fine, turns out there was an engineering problem or something. But that beeping, man, fuck. To this day microwaves give me the chills. Not to mention I tend to take the stairs. My uncle owns a large 100+ acre farm in NC which I would go to during summer vacation to spend time with my cousins. One year, in the late 80s when I was about 7 or 8, my brother and I woke up for some reason and couldn't fall back asleep, so we hung out talking and looking out the second-story window over at the large old farmhouse about 30 yards away. The old farmhouse, which was built in the 1880s, had been sitting empty for decades. If there was ever a stereotypical scary old house, this was the house. So, as my brother and I are surveying the farm, shooting the shit, we look into the southwest corner window on the second floor and see a blue/gray glowing person staring at us. Clear as day. We proceed to freak out, wake up my dad, alert him to glowing person, only for it to be gone when he comes into our room. Fast forward 8 years, I'm 16 years old, visiting the farm again. For some reason or other my aunt and uncle had to take my cousins to something and gave me the option of going with or staying back on the farm. Sensing my first free time in weeks, I pounce on the opportunity to be left alone. The day was really overcast, so I didn't want to venture too far away with the prospect of rain hanging over my head, so I wandered down the yard to the trampoline position a few yards from the old farmhouse. I commenced to jumping and flipping for about 10 minutes until I feel this glare on my neck which seemed to paralyze me instantly, and in that instant the memory of that night 8 years earlier came flooding back. I turned my head, looked at the southwest second-story window, and there it was. Same ominous glow, same outfit, same stare. I turned away from the window and somehow managed to continue to jump, all the while the glare felt like a hand on my shoulder. After another minute or two I turned back to see the glowing person had not wavered. At this point I lost my cool and ran as fast as I possibly could into my cousin's room, shut the blinds and had a heart attack until they got home. Shit. Background info: I have a history of slight habit-formed narcolepsy. Classroom environments always put me to sleep, and some instances when I'm driving. I've always been successful at fighting sleep while driving, although I've had a lot of close calls, lots of head nodding, actually dreaming, rumble strips, having to pull over, etc. But, to be honest, there's been times where I've driving for over 100 miles on the very brink of sleeping, not really remembering the drive. Also, I have extremely detailed and realistic dreams. I hardly ever know I'm dreaming. Anyways, I drove 5 hours to my parents' house. I was sitting in the nice big comfy computer chair doing some work for my last online college course not long after I had arrived. I had that familiar feeling of not being able to keep my eyes from closing no matter what I do. Next thing I know, I'm in my car driving at night on a highway, pretty common in my life. I start to feel real sleepy. I start trying to fight it as usual. I start to have a couple head nods, and I can hardly keep my eyes open. I slipped off for a second. Now I'm back in the computer chair, and I'm head nodding, slipping in and out of sleep. Was I just dreaming that I was in a car? Slip back asleep. I'm back in the car. Was I just dreaming that I was in a computer chair? Shit, I need to be careful, that was another close one. Slap myself in the face a few times. Roll the windows down, feel the cool air. I'm doing pretty good fighting the urge to sleep, but the red brake lights suck me in again, and my head starts nodding off. I'm back in the computer chair. Shit, is this the dream, or is the car the dream? I'm back in the car. Shit, is this the dream, or is the computer chair the dream? I better not fall asleep and find out the hard way. This time I stayed in the car for a while, determined not to fall asleep. After about an hour, I am in the battle of my life with sleep. My eyes are barely open, my head is nodding, and I have a couple rapid slips back and forth from the chair to the car. Okay, I tell myself, I'm pretty sure that the car is the dream and I can't fight this anymore, let's just nod off. So, I finally nod off. When I wake up, I'm laying in a hospital bed. Holy shit, my fear that the car was actually reality had come true. I must have fallen asleep driving and wrecked my car. I didn't know what was happening. There were just a lot of people standing above me saying, stay with us, we need you to stay awake. But that was easier said than done. Head starts nodding off again, eyes are slipping, no, I can't go like this, and then I slip off, unconscious again, perhaps permanently. I snapped awake in the computer chair, standing instantly and knocking the chair over. I just ran my hands through my hair and said what the f. One time my best friend, cousin and myself went to a huge park around the corner of my house around 11 p.m. to have a couple of joints. We figured we would sit and chill out for ages and drive home when the buzz had worn off. So there we are, sitting in the dark just chatting. Buzz has come and gone when in the bushes about 500 meters away there was what looked like a flashlight going haywire, as if someone was looking for something frantically. At that same time, another car pulls up and a man runs out, the flashlight disappears. The second man runs back to his car, turns his lights on, which ends up putting us in the spotlight. He races over, jumps out and places both hands on the front of the car. We can see his security uniform and the stickers on his car. Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone. He yells at us. I honestly nearly fucking shat myself then and there. We were like we didn't know what to do. The security man runs back to his car. Another car speeds up towards him and then takes off, security man follows quickly. We drove out of there as carefully as we could, making sure we weren't followed. Scary night. I've lived in Chile for a few years, and have a good friend Luis who owns a fundo in Patagonia. Fundos are basically sprawling, palatial, 20-bedroom homes that often had their own churches built into them, and whose grounds were taken care of by entire villages. It was essentially a feudal caste system of lords and vassals. I stayed up late one night, smoking pot and drinking whiskey with an Ethiopian diplomat, an arch-musicologist, real thing, and my friend Luis. I stumbled to bed last, and headed to my suite of rooms which radiated out of its own exterior courtyard. I stayed up late writing in my journal because I felt like I was living out some Baroque parlor drama, basically the game Clue, when I heard loud, heavy footsteps in the gravel outside my bedroom. I assumed Luis was creeping on me, so jumped out of bed and opened the door, thinking I'd surprise him. I opened the door to nothing. The leafless trees in the courtyard, the pale moonlight, and silence. I had heard the footsteps, I knew it, and I got excited. I jumped back into bed and started writing furiously about how ghosts are real, and I'd help it resolve its unfinished business, overcome obstacles, find the clues, and rest in peace. After hundreds of horror movies, I knew how to do it right and not get murdered with sexy results. In the morning I woke up late and everyone had gone out. The maid made me breakfast and I told her about what I heard the night before. Her face dropped, she crossed herself, and told me this home was not a good place. She refused to stay after nightfall because she would hear crying children. I wasn't so excited to sleep there anymore. That night at dinner, Luis told me more of the story of the house. It had been in his family for generations, from when Chile was first colonized up until the election of Salvador Allende in the 1970s. Allende was Chile's first socialist president. One of his early orders of business was to dismantle the wealth of these patronas and open their stately homes and vast land holdings to the people. As Luis' fundo was particularly spectacular, many Socialist Party members and their families moved into the home. 3 years after the communist government came to power, there was a bloody military coup that instated Augusto Pinochet as dictator of the country. Luis mentioned that Pinochet had given his family back the fundo, but he didn't believe in ghosts, and, smoothly, didn't want to talk about it anymore. That night I was scared but still determined to see whatever it was walking in my courtyard. At about 4:30 in the morning, I heard him. The footsteps were accompanied by a dragging. Something heavy. I'd never understood the expression the hair stood up on the back on my neck before that moment. But I still wanted to see it. I walked to the door, determined, a little freaked out, anticipating my world to change, magic. Ghosts. Confirmation of everything cool, I opened the door. To nothing. Silence. I knew I'd heard it again, clearer this time. Heavier. With dragging. And I saw nothing. So I closed the door. The second the latch clicked I felt it. Something slammed into the door. The whole fucking room shook. Not just once, but 4 times it slammed into my door. It was furious, and trying to get in. I felt the anger. I felt helpless. I was scared out of my mind. I ran to bed and didn't blink until sunrise. I can't talk about it without my skin crawling to this day. About a year later, Luis excavated a portion of his property to install a wine cellar. It was there that they found the bodies. Sleeping in my bed one summer night. I wake up, it's very quiet, too quiet for the morning. I look over at my clock, it's 3 a.m. I ask myself why it's so light in my room. Then I notice that there is a very bright light emitting outside of my window that's lighting up my room to the point it looks like a sunny day. At this point I freak out a little. I tell myself that it's a dream and to just fall back to sleep. I work up the courage to sit up in my bed. The light, it's so bright that it cast a shadow on my wall behind me through one of Thought's pull-down blinds. As soon as I sit up I recognize that there is no sound, it's very very quiet. I live in Northeast Ohio, so there's always some kind of animal making some kind of noise. But then I hear it, the sound of something slowing started to rotate. Sort of like a slow whoop, then I hear it again, whoop and again, whoop. It starts off deep and slow. It seems like it started to pick up its pace. Whoop whoop whoop. Now it's really going fast to where the whoops get caught up on each other, so it sounds like oop oop. It went from a slow buzzing to a high-pitched squeal. Now it sounds like VVV. I remember distinctly that the sound of the spinning sounded like it was speeding up at a constant speed. At this point in time I'm frozen with fear. The VVV now turned to SSS, then it sounds like a tea kettle blowing off steam. It sounds like whatever is spinning is about to be pulled apart by the sheer force of how fast it was spinning. Whatever was making the sound was screaming. Then nothing. Now lights, not sounds, everything stopped instantly, like it just disappeared into thin air. Now, at this point in time in my life I was into lucid dreaming and I thought I just had a dream, but it felt so real, the emotions were so great. So I got out of my bed and paced around my room for a few seconds. I then lay down in my bed and try to remember what happened. I can still remember everything too clearly. I then shrug it off as a dream and I try to get comfortable in my bed again to go back to sleep. Then from my parents' room next door I hear my mother say, "Did you just see thought lights and hear that spinning noise?" I was dumbfounded. To this day my mother backs up my story and tells it the same way that I just told you guys. My mother is a straight-laced lady who goes to church every Sunday, she wouldn't lie. I had already tried acid a few times and was quite used to the effects. My friend picked up some super strong crystal acid that was no bigger than a grain of sand. We done 2 trips each and it all started off really well, laughing at the texture of bread, marveling at the sky covered in multicolored shooting stars. Then we decided to both hit a bong to amplify the effects and see how far the trip could go. I knew before that smoking weed with acid would sort of make you lose control of your brain, but I wasn't prepared for this. After I sucked a fat bong, my friend had 2 and my previously safe bedroom suddenly felt extremely misty and sinister. We both seemed to have the same sort of feeling, so decided the best option was to get out. So we went for a walk. It was 3 in the morning and no one was about. We stayed close together whispering to each other. I remember feeling like everyone was staring at me out of their windows, like we were at the center of the universe. I was too scared to even raise my voice. We finally reached the local park round the corner from my house and walked across the field, trying to get away from the intense, scary feelings. My peripherals were full of shadowy figures, the field was pitch black, we just kept walking. After a few minutes I couldn't see where we was. I felt like the whole field was closing in on me, and I remember thinking, I'm about to go crazy, I'm about to get lost inside of my own mind. My friend must have had exactly the same thought because he spun me around and suddenly we were facing the entrance to the field, which was a dim light in the distance. We were walking back towards the exit, but it felt like I was on conveyor belt going the opposite direction. I've never felt so scared in my life. The whole walk home felt like we were barely moving. When we got back to my room it felt like the safest place in the world. We both couldn't talk for an hour, and when it eventually wore off couldn't stop talking and thinking about almost being trapped in the field. Mine isn't paranormal really, even though some pretty creepy things have happened to me paranormally. Wow, that's not a word. About 4 years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend. We had a small apartment that was in between 2 close towns, so it was a bit lonely where we lived. There was a 4-lane highway that turned into a 2-lane about 2 miles before our apartments. One night, I had went to town to get some groceries and was driving back. There was a lot of traffic on the 4-lane and I knew the left lane was merging soon. I was in the left lane with 3 cars behind me and 2 in front of me. A white SUV was beside me and I sped up to get around him. He sped up as well, so I slowed down and put my blinker on for the car behind him. They slowed down to let me in, but the SUV slammed on their brakes so I couldn't get over. I was both scared and mad by now, but I took my chance and gunned it, barely managing to get in front of the SUV in time. I think I actually had to get on the rumble strip on the side of the road just so I could. I was beyond pissed, so I stuck my arm out and flipped him off, which I shouldn't have done. The SUV speeds up so close that I can't even see their lights behind me. I'm freaking out, but my turn is coming up, so I slow down, put my blinker on to the right and get ready to turn. The SUV gets off onto the shoulder and stays beside me so I can't turn onto my road. He gets back behind me and gets so close that I have to speed up to about 70 just so he won't hit me. I grab my phone and hold it up so he can see I'm calling the police, and he slams on his brakes and pulls off on the side of the road while I pull into a gas station parking lot. We sit there for about 10 minutes. I'm not actually calling the police, I stupidly called my boyfriend who was making a joke about it. I was 18 and stupid. After another minute the SUV takes off toward me and drives on. I never could see into the tinted windows, but I waited until I couldn't see his tail lights anymore and sped back home. I always looked for the SUV when I was pulling out of the driveway, just in case. I was 13 at the time. I was with a bunch of friends and we were bored. There was a large industrial district at one side of the city I lived in, and behind one of the factories was an area filled with dirt hills and some nice trails. Despite being behind a factory in an industrial area, there were a lot of trees and shrubbery that hid our presence, right next to some train tracks. Anyway, we agreed to travel to this place, and yeah, it was really fun. After about an hour of staying, these 3 guys showed up. They was cool and just wanted to share the dirt hills with us, so we agreed and rode together. About 2 hours later it was about time for it to start getting dark, so my friends and I were about to leave. As we said our goodbyes, one of the guys grabbed my bike's handlebar and told us all to get on the ground. He said they have a gun and they are taking our bikes. The one guy with the gun told us to strip to our underwear so he could go through our clothes and take whatever clothes he wanted. I just remember laying there, in the dirt, near some glass shards, practically naked. It was scary. I didn't know if he was going to shoot us when they were done or what, because they weren't wearing any masks or anything. By this time the other 2 guys were returning for more bikes, and as they took a few more, the guy with our clothes went with the other 2 guys back to their vehicle that were on the train tracks. When they were out of sight, we all just made a run for it to the nearby factory. We seen a worker, told him what happened and begged for a ride. He let us ride in his truck and he took us to my house. I just remember being so happy getting out of there. My stepmom was furious. She called the police. They came, and with the police we went back to the area where we were robbed for our bikes. I got my bike back. It was thrown into a ditch, as well as my shoes, maybe because my bike was a cheap Huffy and they only took the dyno bikes. I remember every time I went to go to school, I had to walk by the road that led to the factories. Just seeing the road gave me this dread, and I did not want to go anywhere near it. Humans are much scarier things than paranormal beings. Several incidences related to the family cabin. Start with the earliest story. My little sister was 3 or 4 at the time and was in the basement of the cabin. She came out of the bedroom and told my brother someone wanted to play ball with her in the bedroom. No one was in the bedroom except her. She was so young we kinda ignored it. Story 2, when I was a young preteen, maybe 12, I was at our cabin in the woods in northern Idaho. It is a 3-story cabin and I was in the basement sleeping. The only other people there were my grandparents up on the top floor. Around 3 a.m., something woke me up. I was sleeping on my stomach on a bottom bunk with my hands kinda tucked under me. So I'm sound asleep, and the only way I can describe it is something/someone who wanted to play with me. I can relate it to a ball bouncing under the covers. My covers were popping up/down like to say, wake up, come out and play. Of course, my mind is racing and I'm trying to logically figure out what the fuck is going on. I grab a pillow and swipe it through the air out of the bunk to see if anything was out there, and nothing. I am freaked out and wake up my grandpa. He goes down there and finds nothing. Story 2, my mom has some friends go up to the cabin for a women's get-together. My mom doesn't mention the random odd things that have happened down there because she doesn't want to freak anyone out. So her friend sleeps in one of the spare bedrooms but only folds half the side of the bed down. She wakes up the next morning, all of the decorative pillows are neatly set aside and the other side of the bed is turned down as well, like another person was sleeping on it. Other weird/odd things have happened around that area. Not so much anymore, but I believe when the cabin was built it must have disturbed a child that died there. So, me and my best friend, including 3 others, were hanging out in this field about midnight to 1 in the morning. You can only access this field with an off-roading vehicle. Our 3 other friends wandered off. I should mention only one of them is a girl. So me and my best friend were walking by ourselves and we came across this girl, wearing a white t-shirt, with her back to us. We think it's our friend, since there are no other cars up there. So we called her name. She didn't move. We got closer and called again. We got probably 5 feet behind her and called again. She didn't move. We got freaked and headed back to the car, found the girl who we thought it was and she wasn't wearing a white t-shirt. We thought it was a prank at first, but we realized it couldn't have been for many reasons. We still don't know who/what she was. The scariest part was that she was near some government building or something. No one knows what it is because on Google Earth it's surrounded by trees. My best friend tried to go there and some guys in a car drove up and told him not to come back or he would get shot. In my state, there are a bunch of supposed vampire graves. One night, some of my friends and I went to one to check it out, take pictures, maybe an EVP. We turned off the main road onto a windy road in the middle of the woods and the car behind us followed us. We didn't think much of it, because it was October. On that same road there is a haunted attraction. We drove by the attraction and they did too. We're still not thinking much about it because there are some homes in this area. We keep driving, it's maybe 5 miles off the main road, but it takes a while because the road is very windy. Eventually we get close to the gravesite, which is behind a boarded up 19th century church, and we start getting kind of nervous. We had driven by many other roads this car could have turned on too, but they are still behind us, and honestly, they're starting to tailgate us like crazy. When we get to the church, of course they pull in behind us. This is basically the biggest nope ever, and we decide to ditch the plans and just leave. They did the exact same thing, except this time, they're tailgating us way worse than before. I could barely see their headlights this time. We speed up and we're going like 45 to 50 down this road trying to get away from them. Keep in mind that this is a windy road in the middle of the forest. These speeds were not really safe. The end of the story sucks really. When we got out to the main road again, we turned left, they turned right and that was it. I always figured they were some other locals that knew about the grave and were screwing with us, but seriously in the moment, I was just thinking about all the horror movies I've seen. Okay, this story involves binge drinking, a campground in the woods, and a mischievous nature. Alright, so one night I am with a couple friends camping. There is a circular, windy road that connects several other campsites with ours. At some point in the night after a few beers and some whiskey punch, I decide to chug the rest of a bottle of whiskey, albeit not very much, maybe 2 to 3 shots. After that we put out our fire and I decide it would be fun to look around for other fires and sneak up on the other campers. We are drunk, and I have this time bomb in my stomach that could send me over the edge at any moment. I decide we should take off our flip-flops to make less noise and carry them. We make our way to the nearest filled campsite and just naturally begin conversing with a very nice couple that is traveling around the country. They offer us beers, and I accept. That is the end of my memory. I blacked out. I wake up sporadically through the night, in the woods, being rained on, and trying to cuddle up in a ball to stay warm. I turn over to absorb the warmth out of the earth. Even in the middle of June, it gets cold at night. Dawn breaks. I finally seem to get myself together and try to figure out where I am. I stand up, using a small tree for support, and gaze upon my surroundings. Woods. Only woods. All I can think is that I couldn't have gotten far, so I try yelling for help. Nothing. Again. Nothing. I muster up every small ounce of energy in my lungs and scream for help, probably the loudest I've ever been, and I can just hear it fade into the trees. I stand there, helpless. Utterly alone and lost. I have no idea which way to go, only that east would be my best bet to find our campsite again. Oh right, the sandals, they're gone. Barefoot, I drunkenly stumble through the brush, cutting my feet with every step. I sit down on a felled tree, ready to give up. I start to cry in pure terror, shout out some feeble cries for help, and still no response. I look around once more, only to see a small clearing in the brush. I realize it was a fork in a path my friends and I had traversed earlier. I begin to stumble along the path, exuberant that I am only a short 100 yards from my tent. I climb a small hill and climb into our tent to find my friends fast asleep. Into my sleeping bag I go and fall asleep. About a month ago, I was out with some friends smoking weed. We were passing around a bowl, getting pretty high. Then one of them offered synthetic marijuana, said it'd just get you really high like normal weed does, and not to worry about it. I was baked, so I didn't question it, and took a hit out of the bowl. Well, I got high, and kept getting higher. Soon, I could feel it moving through my arms and legs. I somehow knew that if I let it get in, I wouldn't be able to use them. I fought it, trying to keep it out. This is what's going through my head, at least. I'm actually sitting in a car seat, arms and legs seizing, head slack, not responding to anything. This continues and I lose, I can't move my arms and legs anymore. I hadn't noticed until now that I can't move anything else, either. My entire body's paralyzed. I can still see, feel, and hear everything if my eyes happen to be open, but I can't control that. Now my thoughts start to break down. Every time I think something, it just stops making sense. I would think pee and then my brain would instantly switch to not pee. I would think, I can't understand anything, and then that would instantly stop making sense. If I remembered something, it instantly changed to not make sense. I can remember everything crystal clear now, but nothing would make sense then. I felt utmost horror, everything I've ever known and relied upon was breaking in the worst ways possible, and I was fully aware of it. That couldn't make sense, though. I remember my friends trying to wake me up, they were too high to really understand what was happening. Eventually, they called my parents, told them what was happening. My dad met us somewhere, and found his son limp in the passenger seat, eyes open and blank, not responding. I could sort of turn my eyes towards him sometimes. He called an ambulance, they came and got me in. The paramedics didn't know I was awake. They gave me an 4, largest gauge. Then they let the new guy have a go on a second. He gouged at my other arm for a few minutes before he gave up. A foot of my arm were yellow in a few days. I could still feel everything, of course. The same guy tried again and I finally managed to bend my arm so he couldn't. Finally we got to the hospital, they took me in. My friends lied and said we were outside playing and I probably overheated. So the doctors put ice on me and dumped cold water on me to get me cooled down. I'd been in air conditioning all day, and get cold easily as it is, but there wasn't any way I could relay that. Maybe an hour of being cold later, I couldn't really shiver, I was able to nod to answer questions. The nurses were asking my parents questions over me and I nodded to interject. They noticed this and started asking me questions. They eventually figured out what had happened, what I'd smoked, and said it'd just wear off. I laid there for about another 8 hours before I could move my extremities again. Another 4 hours or so and I could finally talk. Figured out it was K2 I smoked, which isn't synthetic marijuana. It's a designer drug marketed as incense, basically weed sprayed with some concoction of undisclosed chemicals, imported from China, and sold at gas stations. The nurses said they've had huge numbers of people come in from it. Some are fine, some have wide-ranging issues after they leave, many die. So, sorry that got so long, I hadn't really realized. In any case, make sure you remember this. Had I known was K2 or synthetic marijuana was before then, there's not a chance I would have done it. I'm lucky to be alive and fully functioning, I just rolled the dice right, I guess.